Do you want to know how a restaurant that took everything I had never opened its doors? I was standing in my sister's kitchen the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, folding pie crusts and humming something I couldn't name, when my phone buzzed on the counter and I saw my daughter-in-law's name light up the screen. I didn't answer right away. My hands were covered in flour, and honestly, I wasn't in a hurry. I should have let it go to voicemail. But I picked it up, pressed the green button, said hello, and she didn't answer back. Just background noise. Voices. A clatter of something ceramic. I almost hung up right there. I didn't. That decision, that one small moment of curiosity in my sister's kitchen with flour on my hands and a half-folded pie crust on the counter, changed everything that came after. But I am getting ahead of myself. I have learned, in 63 years on this earth, that the end of a story means nothing if you don't understand where it started. So let me go back to the beginning. The real beginning. My son Marcus is my only child. I had him at 26, alone, after his father decided that fatherhood was something he could try later, with someone else, somewhere else. I raised Marcus in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, on a teacher's salary, which meant I knew exactly how to make a dollar stretch until it screamed. I packed his lunches. I attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every little league game where he struck out 3 times and came running to me afterward like I was the only safe place in the world. I tutored other people's children on weekends so I could put money into a savings account with his name on it. Not much at a time. $40 here, $60 there. But it added up, the way quiet things do when you're patient. When Marcus graduated from culinary school at 24, I cried so hard my mascara left black rivers down both cheeks, and I didn't care one bit. That boy had worked for something real. He had a gift, too. He could taste a dish and tell you what was missing before he even swallowed. He had my grandmother's palate and his own imagination, and watching him cook was like watching someone speak a language they were born knowing. He moved to Atlanta at 26, the same age I was when I had him, and started working in restaurant kitchens, learning the business from the floor up. He called me every Sunday. We talked for an hour, sometimes 2. He told me about difficult head chefs and suppliers who shorted him on produce, and a city that moved faster than Columbus, but had more room in it for people like him. I listened to every word. He met his wife, Priscilla, at 29. She was the daughter of a man who owned 3 commercial properties in Buckhead and a woman who had never in her life driven anything less than a German car. I met them both at an Easter dinner Marcus hosted in his apartment, a modest place he kept immaculately clean, and I watched Priscilla's mother look around that apartment the way you look at a hotel room you're not sure has been cleaned properly. She smiled at me when Marcus introduced us. Her smile did not reach anything above her upper lip. Priscilla herself was beautiful in the way that some people are beautiful, all surface and precision. She wore clothes that cost what I spent on groceries in a month and spoke about everything in a tone that suggested she was being generous just by discussing it with you. She was not warm, but Marcus looked at her the way he used to look at a dish he'd perfected, with that quiet satisfaction that said, "This is exactly right," and so I kept my mouth shut and my heart open. They got engaged 18 months later. I bought a new dress and smiled in every photograph. The restaurant idea was Marcus's dream since he was 19 years old. He had a name picked out before he had a location: Ember and Salt. He used to say it when he was still in culinary school, the way some people say a prayer quietly, to themselves, like saying it out loud too often might use it up. When he finally told me, 3 years into his marriage, that he had found a location in a revitalized neighborhood south of Midtown and that he had a business plan and a chef partner and everything lined up except the capital, I sat very still and listened. He needed $240,000 to get through the build-out, the equipment lease, the licensing, the first 6 months of payroll, and the soft opening costs. He had $80,000 saved. His chef partner had $30,000. They were $130,000 short. I had a house I owned outright. I had paid off that house in Columbus over 22 years. It was not a large house. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a backyard with a maple tree that turned orange in October and made the whole yard look like something from a postcard. I had repainted the kitchen twice and replaced the windows when the drafts got bad and planted hydrangeas along the front walk that came back every spring without being asked. That house was the first thing I ever owned that was entirely mine. I sold it for $194,000. I wired Marcus $130,000 on a Wednesday morning and drove to my sister Dorothy's house with the rest and a single suitcase, and I moved into her guest room, and I told her I wasn't even a little bit sad about it. She looked at me the way only a sister can look at you, with that particular combination of love and alarm, and she said, "Beverly, I hope he knows what you just did." And I said, "Of course he does." I told him, and Marcus did know. He called me the morning the wire cleared, and he was crying. He said, "Mom, I'm going to make you proud." He said, "I will pay every cent of this back with interest." He said, "You are going to have a seat at the best table in the house at the opening, front and center, and I am going to introduce you to every single person who matters, because none of this happens without you." I believed him. I believed every word of it. Not because I was naive. I believed him because I knew my son. I had raised that boy. I knew the shape of his character. I should tell you now what I didn't know yet. I didn't know what Priscilla had been saying about me to her mother and her friends. I didn't know what words she used when she described me to the investors and the restaurant consultants and the PR people her father had hired to build the brand identity for Ember and Salt. I didn't know that there was a mood board for this restaurant that had been presented to a marketing firm, and that the mood board described the clientele as aspirational, discerning, and sophisticated, and that somewhere in a meeting I was never in, my name had come up in a way that made the room go quiet. I found all of that out later. What I knew in those first months was that the build-out was going beautifully. Marcus sent me photos every week, the kitchen equipment arriving in crates, the custom tile they'd sourced from a small company in Tennessee, the bar they'd had built from reclaimed oak, the logo, a single flame sitting inside a circle of salt, printed on everything from the matchbooks to the menus. It was stunning. It was real. Every time I saw those photos, I felt that investment in my chest, like a second heartbeat, warm and steady. The soft opening was scheduled for the second Saturday in March. The grand opening, the one with the press and the invited guests and the whole production, was the following Friday. Marcus told me about the soft opening in January, over the phone, on a Sunday. He said it would be small, close family, and the investment partners and a few key people from the food scene in Atlanta. He said he'd send me my invitation soon. He never did. I waited through February. I told myself he was busy. The restaurant industry is relentless in the final weeks before an opening, and I had watched enough of those cooking shows to know that things go wrong constantly and people run on 4 hours of sleep and coffee and sheer will. I didn't want to be the mother who called every other day asking where her invitation was, so I waited. The first week of March, I finally called him. He answered on the third ring and sounded distracted, the way he did when he was in the middle of something and picked up out of habit. I asked about the invitation. There was a pause, not long, maybe 2 seconds, but I felt it. He said, "Mom, actually, can I call you back tomorrow? Things are really hectic right now." And I said, "Of course, baby, take your time." He called back the next evening. He said that the soft opening was going to be very small, just the investors and their families and a few industry people. He said the space had a capacity issue and they were keeping the numbers tight. He said the grand opening the following Friday was where I would really want to be anyway. That's the one with the real atmosphere. That's the one where I'd enjoy myself. He said he'd have someone send over details soon. I said okay. I said I understood. I said I was proud of him no matter what. I hung up, and I sat in Dorothy's guest room for a long time, looking at the maple tree print she had hung above the dresser, the one that looked a little like my old backyard in October, and I thought about the way his voice had sounded on the phone, the careful, practiced quality of it, like he had rehearsed what to say. Dorothy knocked on the door around 9 and asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. We sat in her kitchen, and I didn't tell her anything, because I wasn't sure yet what there was to tell. That brings me to the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Except I need to stop and correct myself there, because you're right to be confused. I'm jumping ahead. The phone call I described at the very beginning, the one that changed everything, that happened the first Tuesday in March, just 4 days before the soft opening. I keep losing my grip on time when I tell this story, maybe because I have gone over it so many times in my own head that the sequence blurs at the edges. Let me set it straight. It was the first Tuesday in March. I was at Dorothy's. I was baking because I bake when I'm anxious, the way some people clean or take long drives. The pies were for no specific occasion. I just needed my hands to have something to do. My phone buzzed on the counter and it was Priscilla's number, and I answered and she didn't respond, and I understood immediately that she had called me by accident. The phone must have been face down in her bag or her pocket, and my name had been hit somehow. These things happen. I should have hung up. Instead, I stood very still at Dorothy's kitchen counter and I listened. Priscilla was on the phone with someone. I could tell by the rhythm of the conversation that there were at least 2 other women in the room. Her mother's voice I recognized after a moment, that particular clipped, buckhead polished way of ending sentences that I had heard at enough family dinners to know it in my sleep. The third voice was younger. Maybe a friend, maybe a cousin. They were talking about the grand opening. And here is what I heard. Not every word, the connection was imperfect and there were gaps. But I heard enough. I heard Priscilla say that the table assignments were finalized and that she had a situation she'd had to handle delicately. I heard her mother ask what the situation was. And then I heard Priscilla say, in the same tone she used to discuss anything mildly inconvenient, she said that Beverly, she used my name, my full name, not Marcus's mother, just Beverly, the way you'd refer to someone you've already categorized. She said that Beverly was expecting a front row seat at the opening and that she had managed to redirect that expectation. Her mother said something I couldn't fully catch, something about optics. Priscilla laughed, not a mean laugh, almost casual. She said, the PR firm was clear, the brand is aspirational. The whole look of this opening has to match the clientele we're trying to attract. She paused. Then she said, I told Marcus it would be better if she came to dinner the following week instead. Just family, low-key. She won't make a fuss. She's not that type. Her mother said something I heard perfectly clearly. She said, good. The last thing you need at a food and wine event is someone who looks like she wandered in from a church potluck. And Priscilla didn't say a word to correct her. I stood in Dorothy's kitchen with my flour-covered hands and the phone pressed to my ear, and I felt something shift inside me. Not break, shift. Like a tectonic thing, slow and enormous and irreversible. The anger came, but it came quietly. The way deep water moves, you don't see it churn on the surface, but beneath, everything is moving. I set the phone face down on the counter. I finished folding the pie crust. Dorothy came in and asked if I was all right, because she has known me for 60 years, and she can read my face the way most people read large print books. I told her what I had heard. I told her all of it, every word I could remember, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to make some calls. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded once and said, do you need me to leave the room? And I said, no, stay. I want you to hear this. The first call was to the law firm that had handled the wire transfer documentation. When I had given Marcus that money, my attorney, a woman named Patricia who had been practicing family law in Columbus for 30 years, had advised me to document everything. She had asked me, in her direct, no-nonsense way, whether this was a gift or a loan. I had said, loan. She had said, then let's put that in writing. We had drawn up a simple promissory note. $130,000, interest-free for the first 3 years, with a repayment schedule beginning month 37. Marcus had signed it. I had the original copy in a folder in the nightstand drawer of Dorothy's guest room. I called Patricia, and I told her I needed to discuss acceleration options. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, tell me what happened. I told her. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always respected most about Patricia. She listens the way a surgeon works, with complete focus and no wasted motion. When I finished, she said, Beverly, under the terms of the note, you have grounds to request a formal accounting of how the funds were used. You also have the right to contact the business's other creditors and investors to disclose the existence of the debt before the business opens, since it represents a prior claim on assets. She paused. She said, I want to be clear that I am explaining your legal options, not recommending any particular course of action. What you do with this information is your decision. I said, I understand. Can you draft a notice of debt disclosure? She said she could have something to me by the following morning. The second call was to the equipment leasing company. I had found their name in one of the photos Marcus had sent me months ago. It was printed on the side of one of the refrigeration units, a commercial leasing firm out of Atlanta called Meridian Commercial Equipment. I looked up their general number and asked to be transferred to their accounts receivable department. I explained that I held a prior debt claim on a business called Ember and Salt, and that I was calling as a courtesy to notify them that the business carried a significant undisclosed liability before they confirmed any final lease agreements. I gave them Patricia's contact information. The woman on the line was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would need to flag this for their legal team. I said, "Of course. I appreciate your time." The third call was the one Dorothy watched me make from across the kitchen table. I called Marcus. He answered immediately. I could hear noise in the background, the restaurant, I assumed, or something near it. He said, "Hey, Mom, what's up?" in that easy way he had when he thought everything was fine. I said, "Marcus, I need you to listen to me carefully. I want you to know that I love you. I want you to know that I have been proud of you since the day you were born, and that pride has not changed. I want you to know that everything I have ever done, I did because you are my son and I believed in you and I wanted your life to be more than mine." He went quiet. He said, "Mom, what's wrong?" I said, "I need you to know those things before I tell you what's next, because what comes next is not about punishing you. It's about me. It's about what I'm owed. Not the money, Marcus. I'm talking about something that doesn't have a number on it." And then I told him about the phone call. I told him what Priscilla had said. I told him what his mother-in-law had said. I repeated it word for word because I had not forgotten a syllable of it and I never would. He didn't speak. Not once, while I was talking. I heard his breathing change. I heard the background noise disappear, like he had stepped somewhere private. When I finished, he said, "Mom, and then he stopped. He couldn't find the rest. I said, "I spoke to my attorney this morning. There is a notice of debt disclosure going out to your investors and your creditors. It's a legal document. You should have your own attorney look at it." I also contacted the equipment leasing company. "Patricia will be available to discuss repayment terms at your earliest convenience." He said, "Mom." His voice was different now, lower, raw in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. He said, "I didn't know she was going to do that. I didn't know about the table thing. I swear to you I didn't know." I said, "I believe you didn't plan it. I'm not sure what you knew or when you knew it, and to tell you the truth, Marcus, right now I don't have the energy to sort that out. What I know is that you handed her the scissors and she cut me out of the picture, and you didn't stop her." He said my name again. "Just that, Mom." I said, "I need some time. Patricia will be in touch." I hung up. Dorothy was looking at me from across the table with her hands wrapped around her mug of tea, and her eyes were doing that thing where she was trying very hard not to cry, because she knew if she started I would too, and neither of us could afford that right now. She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I will be." She said, "Beverly, you just lit the whole thing on fire." I said, "Yes, I did." What happened in the days that followed was, by any measure, a collapse. The debt disclosure notice went out on Wednesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, 2 of the 4 private investors had called Marcus requesting an emergency meeting. One of them, a restaurant group out of Decatur that had put in $40,000, exercised a contingency clause in their investment agreement that allowed them to pull their funding if undisclosed material liabilities came to light before opening. That was $40,000 gone in one phone call. The equipment leasing company put the final lease confirmation on hold, pending a review of the business's liability structure. That meant the commercial range hood and 2 of the refrigeration units were in a state of legal limbo 48 hours before a soft opening that had been planned for 60 people. Priscilla's father called Marcus. I know this because Dorothy told me later that Marcus had called Dorothy, not me, because he couldn't bring himself to call me yet, and Marcus told Dorothy that the call from his father-in-law had lasted 11 minutes and had not been caught. Apparently, the family's investment in the restaurant, which I had not known about until that moment, was now also subject to review. Apparently, Priscilla's father had his own attorneys and his own questions about a promissory note that should have been disclosed before he wrote a check. The soft opening was canceled on Friday morning. The grand opening. the one with the food journalists, and the influencers, and the PR firm's carefully curated guest list that had somehow found room for everyone except the woman who had sold her house to make it possible that opening was postponed indefinitely. I heard all of this from Dorothy over the course of a week, in pieces, the way you hear about a storm after it's passed, through other people's accounts of the damage. I did not call Marcus. I waited. He came to me 3 weeks later. He drove up from Atlanta on a Sunday, which was our day, which I think was intentional, and he knocked on Dorothy's door at 11 in the morning, and when I opened it, he looked like he hadn't slept in days, which he probably hadn't. He had lost weight. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had been looking at something painful for a long time and hadn't found a way to stop. He said, "Can I come in?" I stepped back and held the door open. We sat at Dorothy's kitchen table. Dorothy had made herself scarce. Bless her, and Marcus held a mug of coffee he didn't drink, and he talked for almost 2 hours. He told me things I hadn't known. He told me that Priscilla had been managing the opening social strategy almost exclusively, and that she had told him she was handling my invitation, and that he had trusted her to do it. He told me that he had not known about the conversation I had overheard, not the specific content of it, but that he had known. He admitted this quietly, and without excuse. He had known that Priscilla and her mother had expressed concerns about how I would fit at the opening, and that he had not pushed back the way he should have. He said that he had told himself it was just one event, and that he would make it up to me, and that he had convinced himself that was enough. He said, it wasn't enough. He said, I let her talk about you like you were a problem to be managed. And I said nothing, and I am ashamed of that. I have been ashamed of it since before you called me, Mom. I just didn't know how ashamed I should have been until I heard your voice on that phone. I looked at him across the table for a long time. 63 years old, and I had raised this man, and I had sold my house for this man, and he had let someone describe me as someone who looked like she wandered in from a church potluck, and he had said nothing. That was true. That was also true. He was sitting in front of me now, at Dorothy's kitchen table, not because things had gone wrong for him, but because he knew they had gone wrong between us, and he had driven 4 hours on a Sunday morning to say so. I am not a woman who makes peace cheaply. Peace costs something real or it doesn't hold, so I told him that. I said, Marcus, I need you to understand that what hurt me was not the seating chart. I have been uninvited from things before. I am a black woman over 60 in America. Exclusion is not new to me. What hurt me was that my son, who I carried and fed and sat up late, worrying about and taught how to season a cast iron skillet, and drove to every little league game and sold my house for my son, heard someone speak about me. The way you would speak about an inconvenience. And my son said nothing. That is what I need you to sit with. Not the restaurant, not the money. That. He nodded. He didn't try to deflect or justify. He just nodded. And I watched his jaw tighten the way it had when he was 8 years old, and he was trying not to cry. I said, I also need you to know something about Priscilla. I am not your marriage counselor, and I am not going to tell you what to do with your life. But I will tell you this once, and I will not repeat it. A woman who hears someone call your mother a church potluck embarrassment and stays silent has told you exactly how much your mother is worth to her. That math does not change. He said, I know, Mom. I said, good. We sat in silence for a while. Dorothy's kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a cardinal was doing something insistent in the hedge. Then Marcus said, the restaurant is not dead. We have a path forward. 2 of the investors stayed. We're restructuring. He paused. He said, I would like to honor the promissory note. I want to put a formal repayment schedule in place. Through Patricia, whatever she thinks is fair. I want it documented. I said, Patricia will be in touch. He smiled, just barely, just a flicker of the Marcus I knew, and he said, yes, ma'am. Before he left, I walked him to the door, and he hugged me the way he used to hug me when he was small, with his whole weight, like he was trying to make sure I was still there. I held on for a moment longer than I needed to, because I am his mother, and I am allowed. After he left, I went back inside, and Dorothy was standing in the hallway pretending she hadn't been listening, which she absolutely had been, and she said, well? I said, he'll be all right. She said, and you? I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the house in Columbus with the hydrangeas along the front walk and the maple tree in the backyard. I thought about 22 years of mortgage payments and weekends tutoring other people's children. I thought about flour on my hands and a phone buzzing on a counter and the particular quiet that comes after a decision you can't take back. I said, I'm already all right. And I meant it. Not because everything was fixed, nothing was fixed. Not yet, not entirely, and there were months of legal conversations and difficult silences, and a marriage I was not sure would survive the weight of what had been said in that room. But because I was still standing, because I had not waited for someone to apologize before I acted, because I had sat at Dorothy's kitchen table with flour on my hands, and I had decided that my dignity was not something I was willing to let anyone pencil off a guest list. I have lived 63 years in this body, in this face, carrying the particular weight of being exactly who I am. I have been underestimated by people with better clothes and bigger houses and families whose names opened doors that mine didn't. I have been the woman in the room that some people looked through instead of at. I know that particular invisibility. I have worn it. I have also learned, over a lifetime of quiet and careful work, that the most powerful thing you can do when someone decides you are not worth seeing is to make sure they feel the exact weight of what they chose to overlook. I did not need a seat at a grand opening. I needed my son to know that I existed. He knows now. And the restaurant, if it opens when it opens, because Marcus is my son and he does not quit, will have my name on a plaque by the door. Not Beverly, not Marcus's mother, my full name. He called me last week and asked if that was all right. I said that would be just fine.